Hello. How would you feel if one small item made you question everything you trusted in your marriage? I'm sure you feel the same way. I never thought I'd doubt her. Not in a million years. Elise was my rock, the absolute center of my universe for 8 years. We'd built a life together in this city, a life that felt as solid and unshakable as the foundation of one of my architectural projects. Our home, all clean lines and ocean views perched on a hill, was more than just walls and windows. It was our sanctuary. It was filled with her art, vibrant, challenging pieces, and my own structured designs, a perfect blend of our worlds. We fit together, two halves making a whole that was stronger, better than either of us alone. We shared everything, our dreams, our fears, the mundane details of our days, the comfortable silence that only comes with deep intimacy. That's why the first time it happened, it didn't even register as doubt. It was just odd, a ripple in the calm surface of our routine. It was a Tuesday evening. I remember the kind of night we usually spent curled up on the sofa, maybe watching a movie or just talking about our day. I was sketching a preliminary design for a new client, the soft glow of my drafting lamp the only light in the room. Elise was in her study, the door ajar, usually a sign that she was deep in thought about a gallery acquisition or an upcoming exhibition. Then I heard it, her voice, low, urgent, a hurried whisper. Not now, it's too close. It wasn't the words themselves, but the tone. It was hushed, secretive, a stark contrast to the open, easy way she always spoke with me. I paused my sketching, my pencil hovering over the paper. I couldn't hear the other end of the conversation, just her side, fragmented and guarded. I can't. I'll call you later. Yes, I know. Just be careful. Her voice was tight, with a tension I'd never heard directed at me, or at anyone else when I was around. It felt furtive, like she was hiding something. My first thought was work-related. Maybe a difficult artist, a delicate negotiation for a sale. Her job involved navigating tricky personalities sometimes. I tried to dismiss it to go back to my drawing. But the sound of her whispering, the urgency in her tone, had lodged itself in my mind like a splinter. A few minutes later, she emerged from the study, closing the door softly behind her. She smiled at me, a little too brightly. "Rough call?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. She hesitated for just a fraction of a second. "Oh, just gallery stuff," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "You know how some artists can be." She came over and kissed my forehead, her touch warm and familiar. "Headphones on?" she asked, gesturing to the noise-canceling set I sometimes wore when concentrating. "Yeah, got the zoning music on." I lied, not wanting to admit I'd heard her. I hated the idea of seeming like I was eavesdropping. Trust was the bedrock, remember? She went to the kitchen to make tea, humming a little tune. Outwardly, everything was normal, but the knot was already starting to form in my stomach. It wasn't a large knot, not yet, just a small, tight ball of unease that settled just below my ribs. Over the next few weeks, that initial ripple seemed to create more small waves. Nothing I could point to definitively, nothing concrete. Just changes. She started keeping her phone closer, often face down. If I walked into the room while she was texting, she'd quickly lock the screen. She was suddenly busier than usual, with new gallery events or late-night meetings that kept her out later. Her explanations were always plausible, always work-related, but they lacked the usual detail, the usual enthusiastic recounting of her day. One evening, she came home well after dark, looking tired and preoccupied. I asked her about her evening. "Oh, just finalizing things for the new coastal exhibit," she said, rubbing her temples. "Lots of back and forth. Everything okay?" I pressed gently. She nodded, avoiding my gaze. "Just stressed, I guess." She went straight to bed, something highly unusual for her. We always debriefed our days, even when we were tired. That night felt different, distant. The small things started to accumulate, each one adding a tiny bit of weight to the growing unease. A new, expensive perfume she started wearing, one I hadn't smelled before. A receipt for a dinner for two from a restaurant downtown. Dated a night, she said she'd worked late at the gallery alone. When I asked about it, she said she'd taken a client out last minute. The explanation fit, but it didn't erase the flicker of doubt when I saw the bill. It wasn't the kind of place she usually took clients, and she hadn't mentioned it beforehand. I found myself watching her, analyzing her expressions, her tone of voice, in a way I never had before. It felt wrong, like I was violating some unspoken rule of our marriage. My own behavior started to change. I became quieter, more withdrawn. I'd find excuses to be in the same room when she was on her phone, trying guiltily to catch a glimpse of the screen. I hated myself for it, but the need to understand what was happening, to make the pieces fit, was becoming a quiet obsession. Was I going crazy? Was this just stress from my own demanding job, projecting anxieties onto my marriage? Our lives had gotten busier lately. Maybe this was just a normal phase, a temporary strain. I wanted desperately to believe that. I needed to believe it. Then Julian entered the picture more directly. My firm secured the waterfront development project, and Julian became a frequent presence, both professionally and, sometimes, socially. He was everything I'd initially seen: charming, successful, engaging. He spoke about the project with enthusiasm, and we quickly developed a good working rapport. He seemed genuinely interested in my work, asking thoughtful questions about the design process. One afternoon, we were at the project site, discussing some structural details. As he talked, he had a habit of running his fingers over a bracelet he wore on his wrist. I noticed it before, a simple leather band with a few silver charms. This time, as the sun caught it, I saw one of the charms clearly. It was a small, intricate silver bird in flight. The detail was surprisingly fine. It was a distinctive piece. Later that week, we had some clients over for dinner at our place. Julian was there, of course, being the primary client on the new project. Elise was her usual brilliant, captivating self, moving through the room with effortless grace. She chatted with everyone, making them feel at ease. I watched her, trying to reconcile the woman I saw tonight with the woman who whispered secrets into her phone. As the evening wound down and people started to leave, I was in the kitchen, grabbing some more wine. Elise and Julian were standing near the patio doors, talking quietly. I couldn't hear their words over the general murmur of departing guests, but I saw the way they looked at each other. It was fleeting, gone a moment I glanced their way, but there was an intensity there, a shared understanding that felt foreign. When I walked over to join them, the conversation immediately shifted, becoming light and general. It mirrored that first party Julian had attended months ago when I first felt that initial dismissive knot of unease. Only now, the knot was bigger, tighter, harder to ignore. That night, after everyone had left, I couldn't sleep. The image of Elise and Julian talking, the intensity in their brief glance, played on repeat in my mind. The whispering phone calls, the guardedness with her phone, the late nights, the dinner receipt, the new perfume. They weren't isolated incidents anymore. They were starting to connect, forming a pattern I didn't want to see. My mind, the architect's mind, was involuntarily building a structure of suspicion, brick by painstaking brick, out of these seemingly small, disconnected pieces. The next morning, the house felt heavy with unspoken questions. Elise had left for the gallery early. I was cleaning up the lingering remnants of the party, the mundane task a stark contrast to the turmoil in my head. I was picking up some things from under the coffee table when my fingers brushed against something small and hard-tucked between the cushion and the frame. I pulled it out. It was a small silver pendant, delicate and intricately shaped like a bird in flight. I stared at it, my breath catching in my throat. It was exactly like the charm on Julian's bracelet. Exactly. It wasn't Elise's. I knew all her jewelry. This was new, unfamiliar. My hand trembled slightly as I held the cool metal. How did it get here? Had it fallen off Julian's bracelet? Or had it been here longer? Had he been here when I wasn't around? The questions flooded my mind, cold and sharp. This wasn't a vague feeling anymore. This was something real, something tangible, something that demanded an answer. And the possible answers were terrifying. Was this a lost trinket, an innocent coincidence? Or was it proof? Proof of what? I couldn't yet bring myself to fully articulate. But standing there, alone in the quiet house, holding that small silver bird, I knew with a sickening certainty that the foundation of my safe, predictable world had just cracked wide open. Our marriage hadn't been flawless, of course. No marriage is. Like any long-term relationship, it had its ebb and flow. There were periods where we were intensely connected, finishing each other's sentences, spending every free moment together. And there were times, usually when work was particularly demanding for both of us, when we drifted slightly. I'd be consumed by a complex design problem, pulling late nights at the office or lost in thought even when I was home. Elise would be preparing for a major exhibition, working around the clock, dealing with temperamental artists and demanding collectors. Maybe that was it. Maybe we had let the demands of our careers create a space between us, a small, almost imperceptible distance that widened over time. We were both successful, driven people. We supported each other's ambitions fiercely. I was incredibly proud of her achievements in the art world, and she always encouraged my architectural pursuits. But perhaps, in our focus on building our individual careers and our shared life, we hadn't always paid enough attention to maintaining the intimate connection that was its foundation. Looking back now, through the hazy, distorted lens of suspicion, I could see moments I'd dismissed. The way she'd sometimes seem miles away even when she was sitting right next to me. The conversations that felt a little shallower, less about our deepest thoughts and feelings, more about logistical planning or surface-level details. We still said, "I love you." We still held hands. We still shared a bed. But maybe, just maybe, the emotional current flowing between us had lessened without me realizing it. It wasn't a dramatic rupture, nothing I could have put my finger on at the time. More like a slow, subtle erosion, the kind that weakens a structure over years before the first crack appears. And then the crack started appearing, small at first, like the whispering phone call. After finding the pendant, those small waves of doubt crashed into a tidal wave of fear. Every subtle change in her behavior, every unexplained absence, was suddenly magnified, screaming infidelity in my mind. The late nights at the gallery became more frequent, stretching later and later. Sometimes she'd come home smelling faintly of cigarette smoke, even though she didn't smoke. She claimed she'd been talking to a client outside, or that someone else had been smoking nearby. I wanted to believe her, I really did. But the explanations felt thin, like a coat of paint trying to cover up something much darker underneath. Her phone wasn't just close anymore. It was practically glued to her hand. It buzzed constantly with notifications. She glanced at quickly, her thumb hovering over the screen, ready to dismiss or lock it if I came near. I'd catch her smiling at a text message, a private smile I hadn't seen directed at me in a long time. The guilt of wanting to see who she was talking to was immense, but the need to know was becoming unbearable. There were little inconsistencies in her stories. A gallery event that ended earlier than she claimed. A client meeting she mentioned only in passing, with no details. She started being vague about weekends, suggesting spontaneous trips she knew I couldn't take because of work deadlines, almost as if to ensure I wasn't available. And Julian, he wasn't just a client anymore. He was the chilling connection point, the man whose bracelet matched the pendant on my counter. I started noticing when his name came up, the subtle shift in Elise's demeanor, a flicker of something in her eyes, a nervous energy she tried to mask. She'd mention him casually, in a work context, but now every mention felt loaded with unspoken meaning. I remembered introducing them at that first dinner party. The brief, intense glance they'd exchanged. The intimate way he'd touched her wrist. At the time, I dismissed it. Now it played back in my mind like a scene from a different, darker movie. Had they known each other then? Had that entire interaction been a performance for my benefit? The thought was a physical blow. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. My nights were spent staring at the ceiling, running through every interaction, every conversation, searching for clues I'd missed. My appetite vanished. My focus at work suffered. The precise lines of my blueprints seemed to blur and shift, just like the lines between truth and lies were blurring in my marriage. I tried talking to her, hinting, probing gently. "You seem stressed lately. Is everything okay?" I'd ask. She'd brush it off, attributing it to work pressure. I wanted to scream, to force the truth out of her, but I was terrified of being wrong. Terrified of accusing her baselessly and damaging our relationship irrevocably. But the alternative, living in this suffocating cloud of suspicion, was slowly destroying me. The physical signs of the betrayal were still just implications. Whispered phone calls and secret texts suggesting emotional intimacy and clandestine meetings. I didn't have concrete proof of a physical affair, not yet. But the deceit itself, the elaborate web of lies I suspected was being woven around me, felt like a profound violation. It was the emotional betrayal that cut the deepest, the realization that the person I trusted most in the world was keeping a fundamental part of her life hidden from me, possibly sharing it with someone else. The silver bird pendant sat on the counter, a silent, constant accusation. I'd pick it up, turn it over my fingers, the metal cool against my skin, the intricate detail of the bird a mocking reminder of Julian's bracelet. I had to know. I couldn't live like this, suspended in this agonizing limbo of doubt and fear. I decided I had to confront her. I couldn't gather more evidence, couldn't play detective anymore. The uncertainty was killing me. I would show her the pendant, tell her about the late nights, the phone calls, the feeling that she was hiding something. I would lay it all out and demand the truth. I owed it to myself, to her, to the 8 years we'd shared, to face this head-on. I waited until she was home that evening. The sun had set, casting long shadows across the living room. She was in her study, on a call, her voice the normal volume this time, discussing gallery finances. I retrieved the pendant from the counter, my hand shaking slightly. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat signaling the impending storm. I walked down a short hallway towards her study door. Each step felt heavy, deliberate, like a condemned man walking his last mile. I reached the door, her voice a low murmur on the other side. I raised my hand, my fingers hovering over the doorknob. This was it, the moment of truth. The moment when everything would either shatter or, miraculously, somehow piece itself back together. My hand was inches from the cold metal knob, my knuckles white. My breath hitched in my throat. But I couldn't. My hand froze. The weight of the truth, the sheer magnitude of what confronting her might unleash, suddenly felt crushing. The potential answers, the confirmation of my worst fears, the accusations that would shatter the peace of our home forever, the possibility that I was wrong and would damage our marriage beyond repair by even asking. They all converged at that moment, paralyzing me. My hand dropped back to my side. I stood there, outside her study door, pendant in hand, the truth agonizingly close, yet utterly unreachable. My hand dropped from the doorknob, as if it were burning. I couldn't do it. Not then, not at that moment. The sheer terror of shattering my own reality held me frozen. I retreated silently, back down the hallway, leaving Elise in her study, unaware of the storm raging inside me, unaware of the tiny silver bird clutched in my shaking hand. That night was a blur of agony. Sleep was impossible. I lay in bed, the space beside me feeling vast and empty, even though Elise was just down the hall. Every creak of the old house, every distant siren, grated on my nerves. My mind was a relentless loop of her whispered phone calls, the guarded glances, the late nights, the dinner receipt, the perfume, and the chilling, undeniable weight of the pendant. Shame washed over me. Shame for my suspicion, shame for my cowardice in not confronting her, shame for the potential truth that was suffocating me. I knew, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I couldn't live another day like this. The uncertainty was a poison, slowly killing me from the inside out. I had to know, regardless of the outcome, the truth, however painful, had to be better than this agonizing limbo. The next morning, I woke up with a cold, hard resolve. The fear hadn't vanished, but it was now overshadowed by a desperate need for clarity. Elise was still getting ready for the gallery. I found her in the bedroom, selecting an outfit, the picture of calm, ordinary existence. It struck me then how easily a facade could be maintained, how close I had been to simply letting my doubts fester in silence. "Elise," I said, my voice raspy, not quite my own. She turned, a soft smile on her face. Hey, rough night. I held up the silver pendant. I didn't say anything else. I just held it out to her, letting the small, silent object carry the weight of my countless questions, my sleepless nights, my shattered trust. Her smile faltered. Her eyes widened, fixing on the pendant. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin starkly pale. The casual confidence she wore like a second skin evaporated in an instant. Guilt, raw and undeniable, flickered across her features before she could compose herself. Where did you find that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Under the couch," I said, my voice gaining a little strength now, fueled by the cold fire starting to burn in my gut. "Last night, after the party." She looked away, her gaze fixed on some point beyond my shoulder. "Oh, it must have slipped off someone's necklace." The lie was thin, transparent. It hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. "It looks exactly like the charm on Julian's bracelet, Elise," I said, my voice low and steady, devoid of emotion, which made it sound even more menacing. "Funny coincidence, isn't it?" She flinched as if I'd struck her. Her hands went to her face, covering her eyes for a brief second. When she lowered them, her composure was gone. Tears welled up, tracing paths through the light makeup on her cheeks. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling before my eyes. "Daniel," she began, her voice choked with sobs. "Don't," I cut her off. "Don't lie to me anymore. The late nights, the phone calls, the secrets, the receipts, the feeling. Elise, the feeling that you've been hiding something from me. All of it. What's going on?" The dam broke. She sank onto the edge of the bed, burying her face in her hands, her body racked with sobs. "I'm so sorry, Daniel," she choked out between cries. "I am so sorry." The apology, long anticipated, offered no comfort. It was the confirmation I dreaded, yet desperately needed. "Sorry for what, Elise?" I pushed, my voice trembling now, the carefully built dam of my own composure starting to crack. "Sorry you lost a pendant? Or sorry you've been lying to me?" She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. The raw pain in her face mirrored my own. "I've been seeing someone," she confessed, the words a heavy stone dropped into the fragile silence. "An affair." The air left my lungs in a whoosh. It was one thing to suspect, to build a mental case based on circumstantial evidence. It was another entirely to hear the words spoken aloud, to have the person you love most confirm your deepest fear. The world tilted on its axis. The solid ground beneath me dissolved. "Who?" I managed to ask, the single word thick with a pain I hadn't known was possible. She hesitated, her gaze dropping again. "Julian." The breath I just fought to reclaim left me again. Julian, the new client, the man I'd welcomed into my home, discussed my career with, plan a major project alongside. Not just some stranger, but someone I had introduced her to. Someone connected to my professional life, my aspirations. The layers of betrayal were deeper than I could have imagined. It wasn't just a breach of marital vows. It was a violation of trust on multiple levels, personal and professional. "Julian?" I repeated, my voice laced with disbelief and a rising tide of anger. "How? When?" "It started about 6 months ago," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Before you formally introduced us at the party." My blood ran cold. "Before? You mean you already knew him? You were already?" I couldn't even say the word. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes. We reconnected at an art auction a few months before that. We knew each other years ago. Years ago, this was new, unexpected." "Ow!" She took a deep, shaky breath. "He was my fiancé 10 years ago, before I met you." The second twist hit me with the force of a physical blow. My fiancé, not just a random affair partner, but someone deeply embedded in her past, a past she had never fully shared with me. The orchestrated introduction at the party, the casual facade, the performance they had put on, it wasn't just hiding a new affair. It was hiding a history, a connection that predated our own relationship. They had looked at each other with that knowing intensity because they weren't just newly acquainted. They were rekindling something old, something she had kept secret from me. The silver pendant, she admitted, was a gift from Julian during their engagement years ago, which she had inexplicably started wearing again when their affair resumed, somehow losing it in the house. The symbol of a past commitment becoming the marker of a present betrayal. The shock, the anger, the heartbreak. It was all a chaotic, churning mess inside me. How could she look me in the eye, build this life with me? Let me introduce her to the man she was already seeing, her ex-fiancé, without ever saying a word. The depth of the deception was staggering. It wasn't just infidelity. It was a lie woven into the very fabric of our shared history, a secret chapter she had deliberately withheld. You let me bring him into our home, I stammered, the words catching in my throat. You let me introduce you as if you were strangers. You lied to me for months about him. She nodded, sobbing openly now. I know it was wrong. I never meant to hurt you like this. It just happened. Reconnecting with him, it brought up so much from the past. I was confused. I didn't know what to do. Her excuses felt hollow, lost in the ruins of my trust. Confusion? Confusion doesn't explain months of deliberate deception, of sneaking around with a man who was once her fiancé. The confrontation was the peak of the tension, the moment the carefully constructed reality of my marriage shattered. The infidelity itself was devastating, but the identity of the man and their shared history, the elaborate lie of their introduction, amplified the pain beyond measure. My heart was breaking, not just from the betrayal, but from the realization that the woman I thought I knew, the woman I had built my life around, had kept such a significant secret, had been capable of such deep deception. We sat in silence for a long moment, the air thick with the debris of our broken marriage. Her sobs had quieted to a low, ragged breathing. My own chest ached with a pain so profound it felt physical. What do we do now? How do we even begin to pick up the pieces of this wreckage? Divorce? Try to salvage something from the ashes? The future stretched out before me, a terrifying, uncertain void. Then she spoke again, her voice barely audible, her eyes fixed on her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Daniel, she said, taking a shaky breath. There's something else you need to know. I looked at her, dreading whatever further blow was about to land. Could there be anything worse than what I just learned? She raised her eyes to mine, and the look on her face was a mixture of fear, despair, and something I couldn't quite read. I'm pregnant, she whispered, the words echoing in the sudden, deafening silence of the room. And I don't know if it's yours, or Julian's. Pregnant. The word hung in the air, heavy and impossible. It landed on top of everything else. The affair, Julian's identity as her ex-fiancé, the months of calculated lies, and it felt like the final, crushing blow. My mind, already reeling, simply couldn't process it. I stared at Elise, her face etched with fear and sorrow, the unshed tears still clinging to her lashes, and I felt nothing. A terrifying, absolute blankness. Shock had rendered me numb. What was all I could manage, my voice a dry croak. She repeated it, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm pregnant. I don't know whose it is. My eyes involuntarily flicked down to her stomach, flat beneath her clothes. It wasn't visible yet, but the reality of it, the potential for a child, for a tangible, living connection that would forever bind us, or her to Julian, or all three of us in some twisted, impossible knot, hit me with nauseating force. We sat in silence for a long time after that. There was nothing to say. No words existed to bridge the chasm that had opened between us. Her apologies, her tears, her explanations, they all felt meaningless in the face of this new, overwhelming complication. The sheer scale of the deception, compounded by the profound uncertainty of paternity, was too much to bear in that moment. I stood up. My legs felt unsteady, like they might give out. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't look at her, couldn't breathe the same air as the wreckage of our life. I need to go. I mumbled, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. Elise looked up, a fresh wave of panic crossing her face. Daniel, where are you going? Please, don't leave. I can't, I said, shaking my head slowly. I can't be here right now. I need to think. I walked out of the bedroom, out of the house that no longer felt like home, leaving her sitting on the edge of the bed, alone with her tears and her impossible confession. The cool evening air outside was a shock against my skin, but the turmoil inside was a furnace. I got in my car and drove, with no destination in mind, just a desperate need for distance. I ended up at Maya's. She's been my closest friend since college, a no-nonsense journalist who's seen me through everything, good and bad. I called her from the road, my voice breaking as I tried to explain, the words tumbling out in a disjointed mess. She just listened patiently, her calm presence a small anchor in my storm. When I arrived at her apartment, looking, I'm sure, like a ghost, she simply opened the door and pulled me into a hug. No questions, no judgment, just silent support. I ended up crashing on her sofa bed in the guest room, the sterile neatness of the space a stark contrast to the chaos of my mind. The immediate aftermath was a blur of raw emotion. Grief for the loss of my marriage, the life I thought I had. Anger at Elise for her betrayal, at Julian for everything. Confusion about the pregnancy, the agonizing uncertainty of fatherhood. Fear of the future, which suddenly felt vast and terrifyingly empty. Elise tried to contact me. Texts, missed calls, emails. I couldn't bring myself to answer most of them. The few times I did, the conversations were strained, painful. She was contrite, remorseful, begging for a chance to explain, to rebuild. She claimed she had cut all ties with Julian, that the affair was over, that she was terrified and didn't know what to do about the baby. I heard her, but the words bounced off the impenetrable wall of my pain and distrust. How could I believe anything she said after months of deliberate lies? Julian even emailed me. A formal, carefully worded message expressing his regret for any distress this situation had caused, offering to meet and explain everything. I deleted it instantly. I had no desire to hear excuses from the man who had helped shatter my life. Maya, in her journalist way, started quietly looking into Julian. Not in an official capacity, just subtle inquiries among her contacts in the city's social and business circles. She uncovered whispers, rumors of a pattern of manipulative behavior in his past relationships, a reputation for charming his way into situations and leaving emotional wreckage behind. It painted a picture of Julian not just as a lover, but perhaps as someone who saw something he wanted, maybe a lease, maybe access, maybe just the thrill of it, and pursued it with a calculated disregard for the consequences. It added another layer to the story, suggesting that while Elise bore responsibility for her choices, Julian might not have been a passive participant. The fallout wasn't confined to my personal life. My focus at work was non-existent. I was distracted, unable to concentrate, snapping at colleagues. The project with Julian's firm, the one that was supposed to be a major step forward for my career, quickly unraveled. The conflict of interest was obvious, the tension palpable. The firm assigned me to smaller, less prestigious projects, a clear professional setback. Elise's career suffered too. Rumors about the affair spread through the city's tight-knit art community, and her gallery lost several key clients. Our carefully built professional lives, so intertwined with our personal one, were crumbling alongside our marriage. Our social circle fractured. Friends who had been regulars at our dinner parties suddenly felt awkward, unsure whose side to take. Some reached out to me, offering support and listening patiently. Others clearly aligned with Elise, or simply retreated, unable to navigate the messy reality of infidelity and potential paternity. The isolation was profound. The days bled into weeks. I stayed at Maya's, unable to face going back to the house, our house, filled with ghosts and painful memories. Elise and I communicated sporadically, usually about practical matters, strained conversations that circled the edges of the gaping wound between us. The possibility of a child hung over everything, a constant, terrifying question mark. Divorce felt inevitable, the only logical path through this wreckage. But the thought of severing ties completely, of losing her entirely, especially if the baby was mine. It held me back. I was trapped, paralyzed by the weight of the past, the pain of the present, and the terrifying uncertainty of the future. I was sitting at Maya's kitchen counter one afternoon, staring blankly at my laptop, pretending to work when the doorbell rang. Maya was out. I opened the door to find a small, unmarked package on the step. No return address, just my name. Puzzled, I brought it inside. It was light. I opened the plain brown paper wrapping. Inside was a small, flat object wrapped in tissue paper. I unfolded the tissue carefully. It was a reproduction about the size of my palm of a painting, an abstract painting rendered in bold, chaotic lines of silver and gray. It depicted a bird in flight. My blood ran cold. It was the sketch I'd seen on Julian's desk that day at his office, the one signed with Elise's initials. The sketch that had sparked a whole new wave of suspicion about her hidden life. Tucked beneath the reproduction was a small, folded piece of paper. My hands were trembling as I unfolded it. Written inside, in an elegant, unfamiliar script, were just 4 words. She was never yours. The message was clear, brutal, and unmistakably from Julian. It wasn't just an acknowledgement. It was a declaration, a taunt. It implied possession, ownership. It suggested that Elise wasn't truly remorseful, that her connection to him, to their shared history, ran deeper than I could comprehend, perhaps deeper than even she fully understood. It reignited the dying embers of my distrust, fanning them back into a furious, consuming fire. If she had truly cut ties, if she was truly trying to rebuild, why would he send this? Unless she hadn't. Unless some part of her was still tied to him, still keeping secrets. The note shattered any fragile hope of understanding, of potentially navigating the complex path ahead. It plunged me back into the cold, dark waters of suspicion, leaving me more lost and uncertain than ever before. 6 months. 6 months have passed since I stood in Maya's apartment, holding that hateful little bird, painting reproduction, and Julian's chilling note. She was never yours. Those 4 words had been the final push, the last piece of a painful puzzle confirming that there was no going back, no thread left to pull on for reconciliation. The renewed surge of distrust, confirming my darkest fears that Elise's connection to Julian was deeper or more enduring than she'd let on, solidified my resolve. The marriage was over. The immediate aftermath of that discovery and the subsequent formal separation was difficult, a messy, painful process of dividing a life that had been so deeply intertwined. I moved into a small apartment downtown, trading the ocean views and open spaces of our house for the concrete and steel of the city. It was a stark change, but the anonymity and the distance felt necessary. Every corner of our old house held a memory, a ghost of the life we had lost. Starting fresh, even a space that felt sterile and unfamiliar, was a vital step in putting one foot in front of the other. My work changed too. After the fallout from the Julian project, I shifted my focus. I started taking on smaller, more personal projects, designing renovations for local businesses, working with nonprofits on community spaces. It wasn't the high-profile, ambitious architecture I'd pursued before, but it was grounding. It was about building things that had tangible value, structures that serve a purpose, unlike the elaborate, hollow facade of my marriage. Sketching, which I hadn't done purely for pleasure in years, became a lifeline. Sitting down with a blank page and a pencil, creating something from nothing was a quiet, meditative act that helped to silence the noise in my head. Elise moved out of the city. She found a place in a quieter coastal town a few hours away. She'd stopped working at the gallery shortly after everything came out, the whispers and the pressure becoming too much. We talked occasionally, mostly via text or brief phone calls, coordinating logistics, navigating the awkward territory of soon-to-be co-parents, although the co-part was still theoretical, hanging on that unanswered question of paternity. When I saw her, usually for handing off paperwork or sorting out shared belongings, she was visibly pregnant, the physical reality of the situation undeniable. The guilt and sorrow I saw in her eyes seemed genuine, but the depth of the deception still kept me guarded. We had agreed, early on, that regardless of the paternity test result, We would find a way to be parents together, putting the child's needs first. It was a fragile agreement, born of crisis, but it was a path forward, however uncertain. And Julian? Maya's quiet inquiries had uncovered more than just rumors of manipulation. His high-flying development firm had faced allegations of financial impropriety, creative accounting, and inflated projections. It seemed his house of cards, built on charm and questionable ethics, had finally collapsed. There were whispers of lawsuits, investigations, his sudden departure from the city. I didn't follow the details closely. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction, a sense that the universe had a way of balancing the scales. But mostly I felt relief. Relief that he was gone, no longer a tangible threat, no longer a shadow hanging over my life. Revenge, the idea of actively seeking to make him pay, never took root. The pain he caused was immense, but my focus had shifted from making him suffer to healing myself. His downfall felt like a consequence of his own character, not something I needed to orchestrate. His story had intertwined with mine in a devastating way, but it was ultimately his own to face. The past 6 months have been a journey through grief, anger, confusion, and slowly, painstakingly, towards acceptance. I've spent countless hours talking to Maya, sorting through the wreckage of my emotions. I even started seeing a therapist, someone who could help me understand how I missed the signs, how I could have been so blind, and how to rebuild my sense of self and trust. The biggest lesson, the one etched into my soul, is about trust. I used to think trust was a passive thing, something you gave unconditionally once earned, something that, once given, was simply there. Now I know it's active, a continuous exchange of honesty and vulnerability. It's about seeing the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it doesn't fit the picture you want to believe. I realize that in my desire for a perfect life, a perfect marriage, I had perhaps unconsciously chosen to ignore the small cracks, the subtle shifts, because acknowledging them would have been too painful. I had trusted blindly, not just Elise, but my own idealized version of our relationship. The betrayal wasn't just hers. It was also, in a way, my own failure to listen to my own intuition, that knot in my chest, that quiet voice telling me something was off. The scar tissue is still tender, the memories still ache sometimes. I don't think I'll ever fully understand all the whys. Why Elise did what she did, why Julian re-entered her life, why they chose to deceive me so completely. Maybe the reasons don't matter as much as the consequences and the path forward. One rainy afternoon, a few weeks ago, a letter arrived. Official, plain envelope. The paternity test result. It had been done months ago, a clinical step in the midst of the emotional maelstrom. The letter had sat on my desk, unopened. I looked at it every day. The answer, the definitive biological link or lack thereof, was right there, a few sheets of paper away. I picked it up, held it in my hands, turned it over and over. My heart rate quickened, the familiar surge of anxiety returning. This was it, the moment of truth for this one agonizing question. But then I stopped. I looked out the window at the rain falling on the city streets. I thought about the past 6 months, the pain, the reflection, the slow, steady work of rebuilding. I thought about the little life growing inside Elise, a life that was coming into the world regardless of the complex, messy circumstances of its conception. I thought about the promise we had made, Elise and I, in the raw, early days of the fallout, that we would put the child first, that we would find a way to be parents, whatever the test said. And in that moment, holding the envelope, I realized something profound. The piece of paper inside held a biological answer, but it didn't define fatherhood. It didn't define the bond one could choose to build, the love I could choose to give. Whether biologically mine or not, this child was a consequence of a life I've been deeply a part of, a new beginning in the wake of a devastating end. Opening the envelope would answer a question about the past, about biology, about betrayal. But it wouldn't tell me anything about the future, about the kind of parent I could be, about the love I was capable of. I took a deep breath, the kind that fills your lungs and settles your nerves. I didn't need to open it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The truth I needed wasn't in that envelope. It was inside me, in the lessons learned, the strength found, the willingness to step into the unknown future, ready to love and protect a child, ready to build a new life, not on the shaky ground of past deception, but on the solid foundation of choice and unconditional love. I placed the envelope back on my desk, still unopened. It was just a piece of paper. The real story, the story of what came next, was mine to write, one deliberate, hopeful line at a time. The silver bird was gone from my life, but I was finally learning how to fly on my own.